Got these animals some food and they got up here. I don't know if y'all can see that one animal in the barn over there, but last night I did end up with the sick animal, and so I went ahead and put him in the pen, and I gave him a shot of macrocin, and I put some food out there for him, and he hasn't touched it in about 12 hours, and so that's a very not good sign. You know, the whole thing that I said about if the animal stops eating, that's a very, very, very clear indicator of some major illness. And so, you know, that animal has stopped eating. All right, I would say, you know, and usually when they stop eating, that's usually you know, it's very bad. All right, and so I have that animal in the preconditioning pen, and I got him a shot of antibiotics, and he hasn't touched his food in 12 hours. And so I've been taking a look at everything, and if you take a look at my animals, you know, other than the real small ones, I mean, a majority of them are over 500 pounds, right? I mean, like if you take a look at these, except for that one right there, right? Like these three animals right here, they're over 500. And I was taking a look at the whole thing, and I may start liquidating animals this weekend. I'm considering it. You know, the whole thing was that I was really looking to liquidate my animals at the beginning of next month, and but I'll see what I'm gonna do. You know, but you know, the weather is ticking upwards. It's getting dry and it's getting hot, and you know, after you know, every single day it's getting a little bit hotter. And so, you know, I'm taking a look at the whole situation. All right, in terms of the you know, in terms of the bigger idea of the business, right? You know, my business is growing. All right, this business is growing. The business is profitable. You know, the business is profitable and it is growing. I'm actually doing very well. When I take a look at the whole thing, in terms of a like a monetary perspective, I'm doing very well. You know, the amount of money that I am making is going upwards. I'm actually doing very well for myself. I'm not lying about it. I am telling you the truth. You know, I've taken a look at the whole thing, and you know, like when I sell an animal that's about this size, right? I mean, like this animal right here is probably you know, probably about you know, this animal here right now is probably about 650 pounds, something like that. And you know, if I sell them at this size and I buy them even at 350, I mean, you know, I make a few $100s. And so, you know, the whole thing that I got going on right now is effectively, well, okay, you know, the whole thing that I got going on right now is that, you know, the way that I describe what I got going on right now is that my business, in terms of a broader monetary perspective, my business is actually growing itself. So if I just take the money that I make in my business and I put it back into my business will actually grow by over 10% a month. It will actually grow by over 10% a month. And what's another way to take a look at this in terms of something other than money? Okay, let's say that I have 45 cattle, right? And let's say that I follow the business plan to a fine detail, and I follow this business plan, right? And I got 45 cattle, and I bring them in at 250 pounds, and I sell them at 650. When I sell the 45 cattle, I will effectively make enough money to buy about 90 cattle, and it will take me about 6 months. All right, and so this is also what I mean by compounding. And also, you know, when I give you when I show you what I'm doing, right, and I give you my business plan, all right, you know, and I've always said, you know, don't, I would highly suggest that you don't go under 350. If you don't, you know, unless you are certain that you actually know what you're doing. All right, you know, you like, I don't know how else to put this other than your opinions are not important. All right, your opinions are not important. The work itself is very difficult. When you watch me do it, you're effectively watching somebody who is the best on the planet. All right, this is not a joke. All right, you know, I don't know how else to put it. All right, I would not suggest going under 350. If you start going under 350, you are entering the danger zone. And if you start going under 250, you are really entering the danger zone. If you go under 200, you're in for the time of your life. The hardest thing that you could ever imagine doing. All right, legitimately in the cattle business, it will be the hardest thing that you could ever imagine doing. Weaning a bunch of calves that are under 200 pounds is like the hardest thing that you can do in the beef cattle business, all right? If you legitimately try and precondition calves that are under 200 pounds, you are in for the time of your life. The hardest thing that you could ever imagine doing. All right, and that's, the whole thing about this whole thing, unless you actually know what you're doing, because nobody cares about your opinion. At the end of the day, your opinions are not going to get you paid. The cattle business is very difficult. All right, farming is not something that you do because it's easy. All right, and if you don't learn how to do it, you're never going to know how to do it. A majority of people who go into farming legitimately never make it. It just becomes too hard and then they quit. Oh my God, I was out in the field for 15 hours and I had to do that for 2 weeks to harvest my crops. And it was so hard, it was so miserable, and I barely made any money. That's legitimately, there's a very realistic possibility that you turn into that. All right, farming is not easy. In terms of a broader perspective, I legitimately made more money as a cattle farmer in my backyard on 10.5 acres than anybody on the planet makes doing anything. Legitimately. All right, when it comes to farming, I legitimately am one of the best in the world at it. Legitimately, I'm not even lying. I am telling you the truth. I am, I don't know how else to put it. Honest to God. God is my witness, all right? When I sell for, I effectively double my money every time I sell my cattle. But you have to understand that the reason that happens is because I legitimately do something that is so difficult that nobody else wants to do it, or even, really even wants to, nobody really even wants to do it. Because the whole thing is like, and it's whatever, but if you take a look at it, right? Like if you could go and you can buy yourself a 500-pound calf, right? If you can go and buy yourself a 500-pound calf for $1,700, $1,800, and you could raise that animal to 800 pounds, right? If you could just put 300 pounds on that animal, and when you sell that animal, you can make $2,300, $2,200, right? There's a $300-$400 margin in there. And it will take you, 4 months to do that? Maybe not even 4 months, 3.5 months. Right? A lot of people prefer to do that. All right? A lot of people prefer to do that. If you could buy them at 400 pounds, if you could buy them at 350 pounds, if you could go to the sale barn right now and buy a 350-pound calf, right, for $1,400, and you could raise that animal to 800 pounds, 700 pounds, and sell that animal for $2,000, $2,200, then you can make your $400 or $500, and your workload will be significantly easier. All right, if you start going under 350, you have entered the danger zone. All right, when you start going under 300, when you start going under 250, you have entered like that is, I don't know how it's going to be very difficult. And if you go under 200, you have effectively entered a situation where you are doing the most difficult work in the cattle business that you could ever imagine. Legitimately. And if you go and watch a presentation done by PhD level individuals, all right, legitimately animal scientists, PhDs, work on commercial farms, large scale commercial farms. And if you tell them, I want to go to the sale barn and I want to buy a bunch of 200-pound calves and I want to precondition them and then raise them up to 650 pounds, they will think you're nuts. Why would you do that? All right, they will legitimately think, I hope you know what you're doing. All right, even the people on the top end of the cattle business don't go and buy 200-pound calves. All right, they won't do it. And another way to do it, another way to figure this out is if you legitimately call a lot buyer. If you call a lot buyer and ask that lot buyer to buy you a bunch of 200-pound calves, most of them won't even do that. They won't even buy them for you. Most of them won't. All right, if you tell them I want a bunch of 200-pound calves, they'll say I don't do that. Why do they not do that? Because they'll all die. All right, you have to know what you're doing to a very high, it's very, very, very difficult to raise a bunch of 200-pound calves. But I'm just saying, in terms of objective information, when I take an animal from 250 pounds to 650 pounds, I just about double my money, okay? About 700 pounds, I just about double my money. Am I suggesting that you go and do this? No, I'm not suggesting anybody go and do this. You should understand that what I do in the cattle business is effectively the hardest thing that you could ever imagine doing in the cattle business. The hardest, by a long shot. It's not going to get, when you start trying to wean a 200-pound calf, when you go and you wean a 170-pound calf, the hardest thing that you can do, okay? If you mess up at all, the animal will die. All right, if you mess up at all, the animal will die. You mess up the feed, the animal will die. You mess up the medication, the animal will die. You leave the animal out in the field, the animal will die. Also, legitimately. All right, but I'm just saying, in terms of a reality, in terms of it is what it is, objective information. When I take a calf from 200 to 250 pounds up to about 650, I just about double my money, okay? Granted that when I raise the animal to a commercial standard, all right, and I raise commodity type animals. Granted that those conditions are met, I just about double my money. All right. And so, the whole thing with this, with everything that I got going on right now is that my business is growing itself. All right. I am actually starting to make such a drastic amount of money in the cattle business that effectively I can buy anything on the planet. Effectively anything. And I have decided that what I will do with the money is put the money back into my business, okay? I have decided that that is the best thing for me to do. I'm not going to go and buy myself a Lamborghini, all right? I'm not going to go and buy myself 2 Lamborghinis. I'm not going to become a whatever, right? An Instagram poser. All right, I have decided that what I will do with the money is grow my business, all right? And in terms, over the next 30 days, not even the next 30 days, over the next 2 weeks, I'm actually planning on selling about 20 animals over just the next 2 weeks, all right? Maybe I sell about I've been, taking a look at the whole thing. Maybe I sell about 10 animals every 2 weeks, or maybe I sell, because if I sell animals this week, well, I'll have to figure it out, but effectively over the next 30 days or so, I'll effectively make over $40,000 in the next 30 days, all right? And, it just is what it is. The whole thing about me, I've always said that the whole thing about me, when I give you objective information, the reason that I give you objective information, the reason that I present objective information is because objective information is not an opinion. Is not an opinion. Like, when you watch me farm, you have to understand that the sheer amount of money that I make farming actually puts me in the top percentiles of the entire U.S. economy. The entire thing. It's not just for farmers. Legitimately, the entire U.S. economy puts me in the top percentages. And I've already, and I describe my financials in thorough detail. Like, my financials are effectively set. My financials are that I legitimately started this business. I started this business by myself. I grew my business by over 1,000% in the last 2.5 years. And in the next 5 months, in the next 5.5 months, I will more than double the size of my business. In terms of how much money do I bring home? Right, in terms of how much money do I actually bring home, right? How much money do I bring home? Like, how much money do I have at the end of the year, right? Like, how much do I actually bring home? Not how much do I, bring home and then I pay taxes and then, how much money do I bring home on a yearly basis? About $350,000 to $500,000, all right? And I will probably more than double that in the next 5.5 months. It is what it is, all right? That's objective information. I'm not lying about it. I am giving you objectively, correct information, all right? When I take a calf from 200 pounds to 650 pounds, I just about double my money. And the whole thing, and I've spoken about this, like, the whole thing about this is that, me, I actually do it, right? Like, I actually do it. This is not an opinion. If you want to know what it was like, and I've always said, like, then go and do it, all right? If you want to go and you want to run 400 cattle a year, if you want to run 250 cattle a year, then go and do it, all right? Nobody's stopping you. It's a free, you can do whatever you want. All right, go and run 250 cattle a year and then see what that feels like. All right? Because, and when I present this information, right? When I present this information, I am legitimately just showing you it is what it is, right? You're actually getting a chance to look at it. I legitimately have some of the best financials on the entire planet, okay? Legitimately have some of the best financials on the entire planet. I legitimately make enough money on this 10.5 acre field to walk off into the sunset. I could legitimately buy anything on the entire planet, just about, short of like a yacht or drugs, right? Short of being an idiot or short of the ultra wealthy stuff, I can legitimately just buy anything. All right, I don't, and the big idea is, and I've already said the exact, I've already told you what direction I'm going, right? This is the direction that I'm going. This is what I'm looking to do. This is what I'm looking to accomplish, right? I'm not going to go and buy myself 3 Lamborghinis. All right, I will grow my business, okay? I will be growing my business. That's the big idea. Grow my business. I will take the money that I make in my business. I will put it back into my business. And when I do that, it will grow my business, all right? The money that I make in my business will legitimately grow my business. I just take the money that I make in my business and I put it back into my business, all right? That's how I grow my business. I don't go and leverage myself to the eyeballs, right? And I've always, the whole thing about, me, I'm not even close to bankruptcy, right? I talk about this, and I've said I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing or whatever, but in terms of my financials, I don't ever put myself at risk of bankruptcy, ever. I don't leverage myself to the eyeballs to go live my dreams. I don't do anything like that ever. All right, if I just went to the bank and took a loan, then I can go and live my dreams, right? I don't do that kind of stuff ever, all right? When I take a look at money, and I've always said that the thing about money is that money is very easy. It's very simple. When you take a look at it, it's a number. That's it. All right, when you take a look at it, it's a number and that's it, all right? Money is not complicated. All right, it's not complicated. It's very easy. And I don't put myself at risk of bankruptcy ever. I'm not even close to bankruptcy. Ever. All right, I don't leverage myself to the eyeballs to do ridiculous things. I don't legitimately, I'm not even close to bankruptcy. All right, and what are, and I've already described my strategy for this, right? How do you keep yourself away from bankruptcy, right? How do you keep yourself out of bankruptcy territory, right? In terms of a fundamental idea, number one, spend less money than you make. Very simple, right? It's not complicated. And I was talking about this yesterday. Like, a lot of times, if you're legitimately doing poorly, you're probably in a situation where you're doing so bad that it's actually borderline pathetic, and you could easily improve your results legitimately if that's the situation that you're in. Number one, right? A very easy thing to do: spend less money than you make. Very easy, right? If you bring home XYZ amount of money, then spend less than that. Very simple, right? It's not complicated. Right, and in terms of okay, when I go, that's one of the, and the other one is don't leverage yourself to the eyeballs. All right, don't leverage yourself to the eyeballs. That will keep you away from bankruptcy. All right, and in terms of a broader idea, in terms of me, how do I invest my capital? Right, when I invest my capital, I invest the money that I have first right? I invest the money that I have. If I have $5,000 in the bank, I will go and invest that money. I will stabilize my assets. I will make a positive return on those assets. And when I purchase assets, I'm looking for something that is tax deductible. There are a lot of ways to get tax deductions. Talk to an accountant about it. Your interest on your loan is tax deductible, more than likely. The interest on your loan is tax deductible, right? I mean, if you're buying property, you may get depreciation. All right, if you buy assets for your business, then those are cattle are tax deductible, grain is tax deductible, fertilizer is tax deductible, antibiotics are tax deductible, right? There are a lot of, talk to your accountant about it. You're looking for tax deductible assets with the intentions of appreciating the asset knowledgeably, all right? And you don't have to become a cattleman to do this. I talk about this in terms of a broader idea, the broader asset market. There are a lot of equitable assets on the planet. The whole idea of having an equitable asset is that you have something that is valuable to everybody, right? It's not just valuable to you, it is valuable to everybody. What are some examples of this? Property, right? A rental property, a business that produces a positive, a business that produces a positive return, right? A business that produces a profit that is worth money. Commodities are worth money, right? And when you take your money and you exchange your capital for an asset and you purchase the asset at its appraisal value, then you are simply trading your money for the asset. If you legitimately want your money back, you can liquidate your asset. But the reason that you do this is to produce a positive return, all right? That's the whole idea. And if you legitimately want your money back, you can just liquidate your asset. All right? That's it. And so it's not, the whole idea is to get a positive return. All right? You want to start getting a positive return on your capital. And, that's the big idea, okay? And, but I mean, there are many ways to do this. All right? It's not, and I've always, the whole thing, you have to understand that, like when you watch me run cattle in my backyard, and this is also why capitalism looks so bad on a piece of paper. Capitalism looks very bad on a piece of paper because it's like, imagine that, and I've even spoken about this, but me, I legitimately do not know anybody that can even do 10%. All right, most people cannot even make $35,000 or $50,000 a year on a 10.5 acre field with commercial cattle. Most people can't even do that. And on a piece of paper, it looks really bad, right? Because it's like you have everybody else and almost everybody is losing money, right? It's like, imagine that you have everybody on a 10.5 acre field and everyone is running a cattle business. It'll be like 99.9999999% are either borderline losing money or making less than 50 grand a year. All right, that's effectively how it turns out. If you legitimately put, even up to 50 acres or 500 acres, right? If you legitimately put everybody together, and this is why capitalism looks bad on a piece of paper, but in reality, capitalism is phenomenally good. Communism is a horrible idea. All right, like if you legitimately think that you can share the pie, if you legitimately think that everybody deserves a slice of the pie, you're a naive moron. Some people fail because they legitimately choose to suck. All right, you have to understand this. All right, legitimately, they do. All right. It's not like they're waking up every single day and going, oh my God, I'm taking a look at what I got going on and I'm going to objectively look to improve my situation. All right, and it's not even, but here's the thing. Capitalism looks bad on a piece of paper, right? And because like when I show you what I got going on, right? It makes capitalism look bad, right? Because if you effectively took everybody and put them on a piece of paper, and for how and we were to determine how much money does everybody make, effectively the entire planet would make less, let's say that we're talking about a 10.5 acre field, right? Let's say we're talking about a 10.5 acre field. Effectively, the entire planet would make less than $500,000 a year. The entire planet. And then when would make less than $350,000 a year. The entire planet would, right? And in reality, 99.9999999% of the people would make less than 50 grand. Right? That's why capitalism looks very bad on a piece of paper. But I am a very realistic example of what legitimate capitalism looks like. I work 7 days a week. I didn't get paid until my 12th year. I actually make good decisions with my money. Right? I am showing you what capitalism looks like in real life. And on a piece of paper, it looks bad because effectively the entire planet makes drastically less than even 10%. But in reality, when you actually take a look at a situation like mine, if you took, because if the whole thing about the cattle business is that it is, farming is legitimately so difficult that effectively nobody can do it. That's why nobody does it. On a piece of paper, it looks horrible, but in reality, it is what it is. Right? You have the one guy who is legitimately starting these businesses by himself, right? Running over 200 cattle a year on his own. Phenomenal results. Borderline like the most incredible thing, in terms of results, borderline the most incredible thing that anyone has ever seen, right? And then this guy is also making drastically more money than everybody. That's why capitalism looks bad. That's why capitalism looks bad, but capitalism is not bad. Capitalism is if you legitimately think communism is a good idea, you're an idiot. And you should probably just take your worthless ideas and throw yourself into a hole. Communism is not good, all right? You cannot share the pie. There is no sharing the pie. The whole idea of capitalism is if you want more of the pie, then you can go out there and you can go and get it for yourself. And I show you, in reality, I show you how to do these things, right? Now, I've even sat out here and showed you how to do everything. Even if you mess it up, you'll only be out, $1,000, right? I talk about this whole thing multiple times, right? If I was going to go and buy 1 tonnage of fertilizer, right? If I went and I bought 1 tonnage of fertilizer, that would be, if I had a 10-acre field, that would be 200 pounds of fertilizer per acre, right? And if I was going to put 200 pounds of fertilizer per acre, right, how much would that cost me? About $600. If I was going to put 200 pounds of fertilizer on my field at a time, on a 10-acre field, how many times would I do that a year? If I was going to put 200 pounds. And we're going to use urea as a baseline for the amount of fertilizer, all right? For the units of fertilizer, effectively 50% fertilizer. 48% fertilizer, okay? I would do that maybe 3 times a year. And if I did that 3 times a year on a 10.5 acre field, I would legitimately grow enough grass to feed 3 to 4 500-pound cattle per acre to a commercial degree. Less than $2 grand. And you could easily run 100 cattle a year on that. All right, you would make all of your money back, you would make a positive return, and you would have a store of equity in your cattle. Your cattle would be worth money, and they would be producing you a monthly income. All right? Very easy, not complicated. And I talked about this in terms of a broader idea, and I show you what money looks like from my perspective. All right, because it is what it is. When it comes to money, I legitimately do better than effectively the entire planet. And I show you how I look at money, right? If I was legitimately going to go and start myself a cattle farm, right, maybe I would need $5 grand. If I had $5,000 and an access to a bank, I could turn that 5 grand into 100 grand in 2 years with no problem. It wouldn't even be hard. All right, I show you what I look at when it comes to money, right? The amount of money, and I've talked about this in terms of the cattle business. Farming does not cost me anything. You have to get yourself out of the situation where you legitimately think that money is the problem. Money is never the problem. Our money is not the problem. Oh my God, I can't, and I've always said that, okay. And in a reality perspective, if you ever actually go out and like let's say you go out into the world, right? And you ask somebody about something and they tell you that they can't do it because they don't have the money, right? That's what they tell you. You have to understand that you are probably talking to somebody who legitimately does not even, who does not, make any sort of, does not really, they don't do well with money at all, legitimately. They are legitimately saying, they don't have $1,000. Oh, we can't put $1,000 into this. That's what you're talking about, okay? You should not go and if you legitimately know people who legitimately have, who say things like, I can't do it because I don't have the money, you should hang around different people, all right? Because that is ridiculous. And I talk about this in terms of farming, in terms of the idea of assets, is that if you purchase an asset and you pay its appraisal value for that asset, you can always liquidate your asset and get your money back. If your asset produces a positive return, right, and you can actually increase the value of said asset, then that's how you make drastic sums of money. All right, the whole thing about an asset is that it is worth money, all right? The asset is worth money. If you legitimately want your money back, you can always just go and get your money back. And in terms of a broader reality, like when I take a look at my cattle farm does not cost me any money. All right, my cattle farm does not cost me any money. It makes me a drastic sum of money. When I farm cattle, I legitimately make such a drastic amount of money that I can buy anything on the entire planet. That's how much it costs me. It doesn't cost me anything. All right, my assets buy more assets. When I liquidate my assets, they produce a positive return. I take that capital, I invest it into more assets. I buy more cattle at their appraisal values. I buy commodity type animals. Once I have my money invested, once I have liquidated my assets, taken the money that I have made, reinvested that capital, and stabilized that herd, I then leverage against the balance sheet. Why do I do that? And how much do I leverage? About 70%, all right? I leverage for about 70% of the balance sheet. And the reason that I do that is so that I can appreciate more assets at the same time, and I get a tax benefit for purchasing the asset. All right, that's how I do it, word for word. That is how I legitimately grew my business, and I've grown my business by over 1,000%. And in the next 5 months, by the end of the year, I will grow my business by more than 200%. That is legitimately how I did it. I am telling you, that is how I did it, word for word. When it comes to, like, if I was legitimately going to consider fertilizer as an expense, if I was legitimately going to consider food as an expense, cattle feed is not an expense. Most of the time when I feed my cattle, I'm feeding, less than 25% of their diet. Almost all the time I have them on grass, okay? I've had these animals on feed for about a week. Up until then, they were effectively eating their entire diet on grass, all right? Cattle feed does not cost me money. Granted that I actually grow the food for myself. Granted that I actually grow the grass myself, and when I grow the grass, the biomass is accumulated to a relatively proper level, and the feed values of the grass are good. If the feed values of the grass are low, and if the biomass accumulation is not good, then you won't make any money. All right? You'll effectively go into the cattle feeding business, and when you go into the cattle feeding business, you're effectively just trading commodities. And if you start trading commodities, you're effectively going to enter a situation where maybe you make $50 to $100 an animal. All right, and have fun with that. All right, but me, I grow the grass and I just put my animals on it. I don't have to harvest it or anything. I legitimately just put my animals on it and they walk around and they eat the grass. All right, you don't even need any equipment. And so that's how that's how I make my money. That's how I make my money, and and I'm not lying about it. I am legitimately telling you the truth. I've legitimately sat out here and I've showed you how I do everything. But that's how I make money, all right? And when it comes to, this does not cost me anything. I think that this is the thing that I stress this idea so much. This does not cost me anything, all right? Farming like this does not cost me anything. When I liquidate these cattle, I will legitimately make enough money to buy more than 70 cattle, all right? I will be able to grow my balance sheet by more than 50%. And I will be able to buy some food for the cattle. I'll be able to buy some food, grow my business by 40%, buy some food for the cattle, buy a load of fertilizer. All right, this does not cost me anything. And even if I were going to consider cattle feed as an expense, even if I were going to consider fertilizer as an expense, that's, a load of fertilizer and a load of feed is less than $3,000. Let's say antibiotics too. Let's say whatever. All in all, let's say it's $3,000. If it costs me $3,000 and I make whatever 20,000, then I just take the $3,000 out of the $20,000 that I make and I just pay for it. It doesn't matter, all right? It does not matter. This is also why I say, this does not cost me anything. If it legitimately cost me $3,000, right? It cost me $3,000 and I made $20,000. Then I just take the $3,000 out of the $20,000 that I make and I just pay for it. All right, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't cost me anything. Cattle farming does not cost me any money. My business is actually growing itself. All right, and I show you how I run my balance sheet. I show you how I do it, right? Because why not? I mean, I already make enough money to do anything on the entire planet. It doesn't matter. All right, I can legitimately just walk off into the sunset if I felt like it. I legitimately make enough money to do anything on the entire planet, okay? It doesn't matter. And so I figure, why not just give the information away for free? And I think that this is also why, on a piece of paper, capitalism looks so bad. On a piece of paper, capitalism looks bad, and a lot of people, are about it. But the whole thing is, the big benefit of capitalism is that the individual gets to choose for themselves whether or not they will become successful. That's the big benefit of capitalism. If you feel like you want to go out and you want to make yourself some money, then you can go and do it. The whole idea of communism is everybody gets a fair share of the pie. Not a fair share. Everybody gets an equal share of the pie. But it doesn't work out like that. Because now you have politicians that make drastically more money than everybody else, right? Right? I mean, there is no fair share of the pie, ever, all right? There is no sharing the pie. It doesn't happen. The big benefit of capitalism is if you decided for yourself that you wanted to go out and make some money, then you can go and do it, and nobody could stop you. You should have a moral compass about it, too. That's the big benefit of capitalism, all right? And on a piece of paper, capitalism looks horrible. And it looks horrible, and when I show it from my perspective, it looks horrible. But, maybe now you begin to develop more of an understanding of what actual capitalism looks like, all right? On a piece of paper, it looks bad because effectively the entire planet makes less than even 10%. That's why it looks so bad. On a piece of paper, it looks bad because you effectively have the entire planet making less than 10% of the money that I make. That's why it looks very bad, right? But in terms of reality, when you take a look at what I do and you take a look at, when you take a look at how I do, legitimately, when you take a look at what I do, I live where I work. I work 7 days a week, right? When you take a, there's a reason why people don't go into farming. All right, there's a reason why people don't go into farming, all right? And when you take a look at it on a piece of paper, it looks horrible, but when you see it from my perspective, maybe it begins to make more sense. You know, because effectively, you know, it's effectively a situation where everybody on the entire planet makes less than 10%. And then you have me, right? And then you have me, and it's like, you know, this guy is making like more than 10 times the money of effectively everybody else. And that is not fair. That's what people think, right? Oh, well, that's not fair. Why does this guy get to make such a massive amount of money, right? But then when you take a look at it for what it is what it is, all right? You want to go and you want to run 250 cattle a year by yourself, right? You want to run 400 cattle, you want to run 200 cattle, you want to run 150 cattle, then go and do it, all right? You want to do it on a 10.5 acre field by yourself alone, then go and do it. See if you can even get to the 10% mark. You probably can't even grow the grass, all right? You can't even grow the grass. You probably won't run your business correctly. You probably won't even raise your cattle properly. All right, I don't know what else to tell you. It is what it is, all right? And I've shown you exactly how I make my money. But that's a very realistic way to look at it. I mean, if I was legitimate, for me to fertilize a 10.5 acre field and legitimately fertilize it to grow enough grass to feed 300 or 400, 500-pound animals, 7 to 8 months out of the year. Maybe it cost me less than $3,000 a year, less than $3,000, and I legitimately am able to run 3 to 4 animals per acre and put on over 3 pounds a day. All right, I can legitimately reach commercial standards on that grass. All right, farming does not cost me anything. All right, farming does not cost me anything. It makes me a massive sum of money. All right, farming costs me negative $40,000 a month. That's how much it costs me. All right, farming costs me negative $35,000 a month. That's how much it costs me. That's the whole idea. Use your assets to buy more assets and to produce positive returns. All right, that's the big idea. And that's it for me today, YouTube. You have a good one.